Hey guys, tonight we're going to sweeten up your evening with a journey through ancient Egypt and their absolutely fascinating obsession with honey. Imagine walking into a sun-drenched marketplace, the air heavy with the scent of spices, and there, glimmering in golden jars, you'd find honey. Not just for your toast, but something far more treasured than a simple sweetener. Honey was like liquid gold to the ancient Egyptians. Its allure went far beyond taste. They used it in medicine, in rituals, in beauty treatments, and even in preserving their most sacred kings. And yes, you probably won't survive this. You'd be stung by a swarm of bees if you tried to follow them into beekeeping. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. I love hearing about where people are enjoying these bedtime stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Honey in ancient Egypt wasn't just a food. It was revered as something almost sacred. Think of it as the original superfood packed with nutrients and used in ways that might surprise you. In fact, it was one of the first commodities traded along ancient Egyptian trade routes, prized for its medicinal properties, its ability to act as a preservative, and perhaps most intriguingly for its association with the gods themselves. To the Egyptians, honey wasn't just something you dip a piece of bread into. It was integral to almost every facet of their lives, from food to religion. It all starts with the bee. Ancient Egyptians, with their deep connection to the land and all things natural, saw the bee as a symbol of industriousness and community. They even depicted bees as being born from the tears of the sun god Ra. Talk about building a reputation before you even start making honey. Bees were seen as magical creatures, and because of this, their product, honey, was seen as something divine. At the heart of the ancient Egyptian obsession with honey was the belief that it was the food of the gods. In Egyptian mythology, honey was considered a substance that could bring humans closer to the divine. In fact, bees themselves were said to have been created by Ra, and as a result, honey was a direct link to divine favor. This made honey a prized offering in religious rituals. Priests would often use honey as an offering to the gods, hoping to win their favor in exchange for the blessings of a good harvest, protection from invaders, or success in battle. But honey wasn't only for the gods. It had a very practical use in everyday life. Ancient Egyptians loved using honey in their food, and it was an essential ingredient in their kitchens. It wasn't just used in sweetening dishes, but also as a binding agent, and even in fermentation. They would mix honey with water to create a sweet fermented beverage called honey beer, which was enjoyed by everyone from peasants to pharaohs. You can think of it as an ancient version of mead, and it was probably the closest thing to a sweet beer they could get their hands on. Honey wasn't just a foodstuff, it was also a vital part of Egyptian medicine. In fact, the use of honey as a medicinal remedy dates back thousands of years. Egyptians believed honey had healing properties, and they used it to treat everything from wounds to digestive issues. The ancient Egyptians were among the first to recognize the antimicrobial properties of honey long before modern medicine did. It's not surprising, then, that honey was an essential part of the Egyptian pharmacopoeia. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians were aware of the specific medicinal properties of honey, or if they simply followed the traditional belief in its magical powers. However, they used honey to treat cuts and burns, believing that it could help speed up the healing process. The sticky substance was applied directly to wounds to keep out bacteria and promote faster recovery. It was also used in a wide range of potions and salves, many of which would later be passed down through generations. Now let's pause for a second, and I want you to imagine what this would have been like. You walk into a bustling Egyptian marketplace. The sun beats down and the air is thick with the smells of bread baking in outdoor ovens, fresh fruits, and the fragrant spices from distant lands. But what stands out most is the golden honey displayed in jars with the rich, sweet scent teasing your senses. It's not just a commodity, it's an essential part of life here. The jars are as precious as gold, and people are ready to pay top dollar, or rather top barley, and wheat for a taste of this heavenly nectar. Honey was so revered, in fact, that it was often used in burial practices. When pharaohs and high-ranking officials were mummified, honey was sometimes placed in the tomb to accompany them on their journey to the afterlife. This was thought to protect them from decay and provide sustenance in the afterlife. Some tombs have even been discovered with honey in jars that are still perfectly preserved after thousands of years. Imagine for a second that the honey you're about to try in your own kitchen was once sealed in a tomb beside a king. Talk about a touch of luxury. Historians still debate whether honey was truly a key component in the embalming process, but its role in preserving the body for eternity certainly makes a case for it. And beyond preservation, honey also had symbolic importance in Egyptian burial rituals, often seen as a key to eternal life. It wasn't just the tangible sweetness of the honey that the Egyptians sought. It was the promise of a never-ending journey preserved forever in the afterlife, much like the honey itself. Imagine standing in the scorching sun of ancient Egypt, your skin already sticky with sweat as you squint at a hive teeming with bees. The air buzzes with the frantic energy of thousands of little workers, each one fiercely guarding the golden treasure hidden within their waxen fortress. You can almost hear the steady hum, feel the heat radiating from the hive, and sense the slight sting of anxiety as you prepare to collect that precious nectar. Welcome to the world of ancient Egyptian beekeeping, a craft that was as dangerous as it was rewarding. While today we might think of beekeeping as a quaint, almost pastoral activity in ancient Egypt, it was an endeavor that required bravery, skill, and a whole lot of patience. After all, honey wasn't just a treat. It was a form of wealth, a medicine, a sacred offering, and a preservative that could withstand the ravages of time. But to get it, you had to brave the wrath of thousands of angry bees. The Egyptians were among the first to practice organized beekeeping. They built elaborate clay and mud hives, arranging them in long rows to maximize space and production. Picture it rows upon rows of cylindrical hives, each one meticulously constructed to house a thriving colony. The hives were stacked like giant bread loaves, some of them towering several feet high, and each one buzzing with life. But it wasn't just about setting up hives and hoping for the best. The Egyptians developed a sophisticated system for managing bees. They knew how to calm the bees using smoke, how to handle the fragile honeycombs without destroying them, and how to extract the honey while leaving enough for the colony to survive. They even figured out the best times of year to harvest honey, usually during the dry season when flowers were in full bloom and the bees were producing at their peak. Harvesting honey was a dangerous task. Picture yourself standing in front of a hive, the air thick with bees darting in and out like tiny missiles. You'd be armed with little more than a few pieces of cloth to protect your skin, a handful of smoke to calm the bees, and a whole lot of courage. The bees were not happy to see you. and they'd make their displeasure known with sharp, stinging reminders that this was their territory. But why take the risk? Because the reward was worth it. A single hive could produce pounds of honey, each drop more valuable than gold. Honey was carefully collected, strained, and then sealed in jars, often with beeswax poured over the top to keep it fresh. These jars would be stored in cool, dark places where the honey could last for years or even centuries. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians used specialized tools to extract honey or if they relied solely on their hands and a few rudimentary implements. Some scholars believe they used simple scoops or ladles made from pottery or reed, while others suggest that they may have developed early forms of honey extractors. Regardless of the method, the process was labor-intensive, requiring a delicate touch and a strong resistance to pain. And it wasn't just the honey they were after. Beeswax was another prized product used in everything from cosmetics to mummification. Picture the craftsmen of ancient Egypt, their hands slick with warm, pliable wood as they molded figurines, sealed documents, and even crafted death masks. The wax was also used to insulate boats, waterproof baskets, and create intricate amulets believed to protect the wearer from evil spirits. But beyond the practical uses, there was something almost magical about beekeeping in ancient Egypt. The bee was a symbol of royalty, representing the king's ability to organize control and protect his people. In fact, one of the earliest royal titles in Egypt was He of the Sedge and the Bee, a reference to the king's dominion over both Upper and Lower Egypt. The bee, in essence, was a symbol of order and unity, a perfect representation of the pharaoh's divine rule. Imagine the scene: a royal procession. The pharaoh, seated high on a gilded throne, surrounded by guards carrying banners adorned with golden bees. The scent of honey wafts through the air, mingling with the rich aroma of incense, and the sound of drums echoing across the sands. Honey, in this context, is more than just a food. It's a symbol of wealth, a marker of power, a gift fit for a king. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians fully understood the life cycle of bees, or if they simply observed their behavior and learned through trial and error. There are no surviving texts that detail the intricacies of bee reproduction, but the Egyptians clearly knew enough to maintain thriving colonies year after year. They recognized that bees needed flowers to thrive, and they likely encouraged the planting of certain crops to ensure a steady supply of nectar. But it wasn't just the Egyptians who were obsessed with honey. The practice of beekeeping spread throughout the ancient world, from Mesopotamia to Greece to Rome, each culture putting its own spin on the craft. However, the Egyptians were among the first to treat beekeeping as a form of agriculture, a systematic, organized industry that required specialized skills and knowledge. Imagine, for a moment, standing in the middle of a vast Egyptian apiary, the sun setting behind the distant pyramids, the air humming with the sound of thousands of bees returning to their hives. The scent of honey hangs heavy in the air, mingling with the dusty aroma of dry earth and the faint, sweet smell of lotus flowers blooming nearby. You can almost taste the honey, feel its sticky warmth on your fingers, and sense the ancient hands that carefully tended these hives generation after generation. Honey was more than a luxury. In ancient Egypt, it was a testament to human ingenuity, a product of patience, skill, and a willingness to brave the sting of thousands of tiny warriors. Each drop was a reminder of the delicate balance between man and nature, a balance the Egyptians had mastered thousands of years ago, and a tradition that in many ways still endures today. Now, close your eyes and imagine yourself standing in a cool, dimly lit room filled with the scent of herbs and burning incense. Shelves line the walls, each packed with clay jars labeled in hieroglyphics, some filled with dried flowers, others with mysterious powders. And right there in the center of it all sits a golden jar of honey. But this isn't just any honey. It's medicine, the kind that could soothe a burn, heal a wound, or even stave off infection. Welcome to the world of ancient Egyptian medicine, where honey was the go-to remedy for just about everything. The ancient Egyptians were surprisingly advanced in their medical practices, and honey was one of their most powerful tools. Far from being a simple sweetener, it was considered a potent healer, capable of treating a range of ailments. You could almost call it the ancient Egyptian version of Neosporin, applied to cuts, scrapes, and burns to prevent infection. And they weren't wrong. Modern science confirms that honey has natural antimicrobial properties thanks to its low water content and acidic pH, making it an inhospitable environment for bacteria. But the Egyptians didn't have lab coats or microscopes. Instead, they relied on centuries of trial and error passed down from healer to healer, each one refining the recipes and techniques. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest known medical texts dating back to around 1550 BCE, contains dozens of references to honey. This ancient scroll details hundreds of remedies for everything from headaches to eye infections, and honey is a key ingredient in many of them. Imagine a healer mixing honey with ground acacia leaves and a dash of salt to create a paste for treating infected wounds. Or picture a physician preparing a soothing tonic of honey and milk to relieve a sore throat. In some cases, honey was combined with copper to make an antiseptic salve, an early form of antibacterial treatment that modern researchers still find fascinating. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians fully understood the scientific reasons behind honey's healing properties, or if they simply observed its effectiveness over time. Some argue that the Egyptians must have noticed how honey kept food from spoiling, and applied that logic to wounds, using it as a natural preservative to prevent infection. Others suggest that the use of honey in medicine may have been as much a spiritual practice as a medical one, a way to harness the divine essence of the bee, which was associated with Ra, the sun god. Now, picture this. A warrior limps into a temple after a skirmish, his arm badly cut and oozing. The healer, draped in linen robes, cleans the wound with water, and then applies a thick paste made of honey, resin, and animal fat. The honey seals the wound, creating a protective barrier, while the resin helps to draw out impurities. The warrior winces, but the healer murmurs a prayer to the gods, asking them to lend their strength to the wounded man. And just like that, honey isn't just a treatment, it's a bridge between the earthly and the divine. But honey wasn't only used for external injuries. The Egyptians also ingested it to treat internal ailments. Mixed with herbs, it became a potent remedy for digestive issues, respiratory infections, and even eye diseases. Picture a woman lying on a reed mat, her eyes swollen and red from infection. The healer drips a solution of honey and crushed frankincense into her eyes, the sweetness burning slightly as it coats the infected area. Sounds uncomfortable. Absolutely effective. Quite possibly, modern science has found that honey contains glucose oxidase, an enzyme that produces hydrogen peroxide when mixed with bodily fluids, a natural disinfectant that could explain why these treatments sometimes worked. Now, let's talk about the quirkiest use of honey in ancient Egyptian medicine, its role in fertility treatments. Yes, you heard that right. Some ancient Egyptian fertility tests involved placing honey and other substances inside a woman's body to determine whether she could conceive. The logic: if the honey moved or changed in a certain way, it was seen as a sign of potential fertility. Not exactly a foolproof method, but hey, it was over 3,000 years ago. Another peculiar use was the honey enema. Yes, that was a thing. The Egyptians believed that honey could cleanse the body from the inside out, and they weren't shy about using it in ways that might make modern listeners cringe. Imagine a physician standing over a patient, a pot of honey simmering over a small fire, preparing to administer a treatment that would, let's just say, get things moving. But honey wasn't just for the living. It was also a key ingredient in preserving the dead. Some scholars suggest that honey was used to coat the bodies of the deceased, not only to prevent decay, but also to symbolize eternal sweetness in the afterlife. In fact, there are records of ancient tombs being found with jars of honey, still sealed, the contents perfectly preserved after thousands of years. Can you imagine stumbling upon a pot of honey that was last opened when Cleopatra was still ruling Egypt? Historians still argue over how widespread honey's use in mummification truly was. Some believe that honey was reserved only for the elite, while others suggest it was more common, particularly in remote regions where more traditional embalming materials were scarce. Either way, honey's antimicrobial properties would have made it an ideal candidate for preservation. A natural embalming fluid that could ward off decay while keeping the body sweet-smelling for the gods. Now, let's step back into that ancient apothecary room. The healer stands over a boiling pot, stirring a mixture of honey, resin, and herbs. The air is thick with the scent of sweetness and smoke, a fragrance that is at once comforting and ominous. As the healer dips a reed brush into the mixture and applies it to a bandage, you can almost feel the warmth of the honey, the stickiness on your skin, the soothing balm that has been used to heal the wounds of warriors, soothe the pains of the elderly, and preserve the bodies of kings. Honey wasn't just a food in ancient Egypt. It was a medicine, a talisman, a link to the divine, a golden thread that connected the living, the dead, and the gods themselves. Picture this. You're standing in the shadow of a towering temple, the sun beating down mercilessly on the white limestone walls. The air's thick with the scent of burning incense, and the sound of chanting priests echoes through the hall. Before you, an altar draped in fine linens is piled high with offerings, jars of beer, loaves of bread, baskets of dates, and gleaming like liquid gold pots of honey. But these aren't just simple gifts. They're offerings to the gods, a way for mortals to communicate with the divine. In ancient Egypt, honey wasn't just a tasty treat or a medicinal balm. It was a sacred substance, a conduit between the earthly realm and the world of the gods. From the grand temples of Karnak to the humblest village shrines, honey played a crucial role in religious rituals and ceremonies, serving as both a physical offering and a symbol of divine sweetness and abundance. To understand honey's role in Egyptian rituals, you need to know just how seriously the Egyptians took their relationship with the gods. The gods weren't distant, abstract beings. They were ever-present forces that could influence everything from the Nile's flooding to a farmer's crop yield. And in a society where life and death balanced on the razor's edge of nature's whims, keeping the gods happy was a matter of survival. That's where honey came in. It was considered a food of the gods, a nectar so pure that it was thought to bridge the gap between the mortal and the divine. The Egyptians believed that bees were born from the tears of Ra, the sun god. As the story goes, when Ra wept, his tears fell to the earth and transformed into bees. And from those bees came honey, a gift from the gods carrying the essence of Ra himself. Imagine a priest standing before a statue of Ra, his arms raised in supplication, pouring honey over the altar as a sweet-smelling offering. The golden liquid drips down the stone, pooling at the feet of the god, symbolizing the flow of divine favor from the heavens to the earth. The priests would chant hymns, their voices rising and falling, like the hum of bees invoking the gods to bless the land with abundance, protection, and fertility. Historians still debate how widespread honey's use in rituals truly was. Some argue that it was reserved for the most sacred ceremonies, used only in the temples of major gods like Ra, Osiris, and Hathor. Others suggest that honey was a common offering found in household shrines and village altars across the land. Regardless of its prevalence, there's no denying that honey was a powerful symbol of divine sweetness, a way to coax the gods into bestowing their blessings on the mortal realm. And it wasn't just Ra who received these honeyed offerings. Hathor, the goddess of love. Music and motherhood was also associated with honey, depicted as a cow or a woman with cow horns. Hathor was known as the Lady of Drunkenness, and her festivals were wild, raucous affairs where honey was often mixed with beer to create potent libations. Imagine a crowd of revelers dancing under the hot desert sun, swaying to the rhythm of drums, their lips sticky with honey beer, as they celebrated the goddess of joy and fertility. But honey wasn't only used to honor the gods. It was also a key component in the rites of the dead. The Egyptians believed that the afterlife was a mirror of the earthly realm, a place where the dead could continue to enjoy all the pleasures of life provided they had the right provisions. And what better way to ensure eternal sweetness than to pack the tomb with jars of honey? Picture a tomb deep beneath the sands, its walls adorned with colorful scenes of the deceased feasting with the gods. On a stone shelf sits a line of clay jars, each one sealed with a thick layer of beeswax to keep the honey fresh. These jars weren't just food for the afterlife. They were also symbolic offerings meant to ensure that the deceased would be greeted with sweetness upon entering the underworld. But honey's role in funerary rituals didn't stop there. In some cases, honey was actually poured over the body during the mummification process, serving as a preservative to protect the flesh from decay. The Egyptians believed that the sweetness of honey could ward off evil spirits, creating a protective barrier between the body and the chaotic forces of the underworld. Historians still argue whether honey was a standard component of the embalming process, or if its use was reserved for the wealthiest and most powerful individuals. Some scholars point to the discovery of honey-coated corpses in remote tombs, suggesting that honey may have been a more common funerary material than previously thought. Others maintain that such cases were anomalies, rare instances of elite embalming techniques preserved over millennia. Regardless of its prevalence, honey remained a potent symbol in the realm of the dead. In some tombs, inscriptions mention the honey of the afterlife, a metaphor for the eternal sweetness awaiting the deceased in the fields of Aru, the heavenly paradise where the dead could feast alongside the gods. Imagine a tranquil scene. Fields of golden grain rivers of sweet water, and tables piled high with fruits, bread, and jars of honey. a banquet prepared for those who had lived righteous lives. But honey wasn't just for the elite. Even commoners used it in rituals and offerings, albeit in smaller quantities. A poor farmer might scrape together a few drops of honey to offer to a household god, hoping for a good harvest or the safe return of a loved one from a distant journey. For those who couldn't afford gold or precious gems, honey was the next best thing, a gift from nature that carried divine significance. And now, as you stand in that temple, watching the priests pour honey over the altar, you can almost hear the hum of bees, feel the warmth of the sun on your skin, and taste the sweetness of a substance that was as much a part of the divine as it was a part of daily life. For the Egyptians, honey was more than just food. It was a prayer, a promise, a connection to the gods themselves. And in a world where life and death hung in the balance of divine favor, the sweetness of honey was a powerful offering, a way to ensure that the gods would look kindly upon you in this life and the next. Now, let's step into a dark, echoing chamber, deep beneath the sands of Egypt. The air is heavy with the scent of frankincense and myrrh, and the dim light flickers across a stone slab where a body lies shrouded in linen. This is no ordinary body. It is the preserved remains of a pharaoh, a god-king, and the process of mummification is about to begin. And right there, amidst the oils, resins, and natron salts, is a jar of honey, ready to play its own crucial role in the ritual of eternal preservation. The ancient Egyptians were obsessed with life after death. They believed that the body had to be preserved for the soul to navigate the afterlife successfully. But embalming wasn't just about practical preservation. It was also a deeply symbolic act, a way to prepare the deceased for the next world. And honey, with its golden hue and near miraculous ability to resist decay, became a key component in this sacred process. Now, imagine the scene. A group of priests, heads shaven, and draped in spotless white robes, gather around the stone slab. They chant prayers to Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, asking him to protect and guide the soul of the deceased. In their hands they hold jars of oils and resins, but also pots of honey, thick, amber-colored and gleaming in the torchlight. Honey was used in several stages of the mummification process. First, it was sometimes applied to the body to cleanse and purify the skin, acting as a natural antiseptic. The Egyptians understood that honey had the power to prevent rot and decay qualities that were essential when dealing with a corpse destined for eternity. Historians still debate whether honey was a primary embalming agent or a supplementary one. Some argue that honey was used to coat the skin as a protective barrier, sealing in the body's moisture and preventing bacterial growth. Others suggest that honey was primarily used to preserve the internal organs, which were often removed and stored in canopic jars alongside resins and oils. Picture a priest carefully scooping honey into a canopic jar, the thick, sweet liquid pooling around the liver or stomach of the deceased. It might sound bizarre, but honey's antimicrobial properties made it a surprisingly effective preservative. In fact, archaeologists have discovered pots of honey in ancient tombs that were still edible after thousands of years, further evidence of honey's remarkable longevity. But honey wasn't just a practical preservative. It was also a powerful symbol of rebirth and resurrection. The Egyptians believed that honey carried the essence of Ra, the sun god, whose tears had transformed into bees. By anointing the body with honey, they were essentially surrounding the deceased with divine protection, a golden armor that would guard them on their journey through the underworld. And the use of honey in mummification wasn't limited to kings and queens. Even commoners, if they could afford it, might use small amounts of honey to preserve their loved ones, though the quantity and quality of honey varied greatly depending on wealth and status. Imagine a humble farmer scraping together his life savings to buy a single jar of honey for his deceased wife, hoping to provide her with just a hint of divine protection as she faced the afterlife. But let's talk about one of the most bizarre and perhaps apocryphal stories involving honey and mummification. According to some ancient sources, certain high-ranking individuals were supposedly immersed entirely in honey as a form of long-term preservation. This method was said to be so effective that the body would remain intact for decades, even centuries, a practice that became known as honey mummification. Historians still argue whether this was ever actually practiced or if it was merely a myth, a tall tale spun by later Greek and Roman writers fascinated by the exotic customs of Egypt. One particularly famous story involves the body of Alexander the Great, who was allegedly transported back to Macedonia, encased in a massive tub of honey, a method intended to preserve his body during the long journey. While there is little concrete evidence to support this claim, it certainly underscores the ancient belief in honey's almost magical preservative powers. Now, let's zoom in closer. Imagine a pair of hands, calloused and stained with resin, gently pouring honey over a mummified body. The golden liquid seeps into the linen wrapping, solidifying as it cools, forming a sweet, protective shell. The priests chant softly, their voices echoing through the stone chamber, invoking the gods to bless the deceased and guide them safely to the afterlife. But honey wasn't just for the dead. It was also used in the burial rituals themselves. Picture the mourners gathered around the tomb, their faces streaked with tears as a priest offers a bowl of honey to the gods. The honey is poured out onto the ground, symbolizing the sweetness of the deceased's life and the hope for a peaceful transition to the next world. In some cases, honey was even placed in the tomb as a food offering, a provision for the journey through the underworld. Imagine the deceased awakening in the afterlife, hungry and disoriented, only to find a jar of honey waiting beside them. A taste of sweetness amidst the darkness, a reminder of life's pleasures even in death. And let's not forget the honeyed amulets, small intricately carved charms coated in honey and placed within the wrappings of the mummy. These amulets, often shaped like scarabs or ankhs, were believed to protect the soul from evil spirits and guide it safely through the treacherous paths of the underworld. The honey coating not only preserved the amulet, but also imbued it with divine power, linking the deceased to the gods themselves. But what did all this mean for the living? For those who remained behind, honey was a bittersweet reminder of what had been lost, a taste of sweetness laced with sorrow. And yet, it was also a symbol of hope, a promise that life could endure beyond death, preserved in the amber embrace of Ra's sacred nectar. And now, as we leave the darkened chamber and step back into the blinding sun, the scent of honey still lingers in the air, a haunting reminder of the sweetness that once flowed through the veins of a living king, now stilled and preserved for eternity. Imagine the bustling kitchens of an ancient Egyptian palace. The air is filled with the rich, warm scent of baking bread, simmering stews, and the unmistakable golden sweetness of honey. Servants rush to and fro, balancing trays laden with delicacies, while the royal cooks stir steaming pots of honey-laden sauces, their arms slick with sweat from the relentless heat of clay ovens. This is where the magic of ancient Egyptian cuisine comes to life, And at the heart of it all is honey, a staple ingredient that transcends mere sweetness. Honey wasn't just a luxury for the elite. It was a culinary necessity, a natural sweetener in an age before refined sugar. The Egyptians were remarkably resourceful when it came to using honey in their cooking, incorporating it into both everyday meals and extravagant feasts. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of ketchup, ubiquitous, versatile, and endlessly adaptable. Picture a royal feast laid out on low, gilded tables, piles of flatbread roasted meats dripping with honey, glazed bowls of spiced lentils, and clusters of dates stuffed with honey and nuts. For the pharaoh and his guests, honey wasn't just a condiment. It was a symbol of wealth and divine favor. A meal sweetened with honey was a meal blessed by the gods, a reminder of Ra's tears transformed into golden nectar. Historians still argue about the exact recipes used in ancient Egyptian cooking, but surviving texts like the Ebers Papyrus and the Harris Papyrus offer tantalizing glimpses into their culinary practices. Take, for instance, a dish called tiger nut sweets, a simple yet decadent treat made from ground tiger nuts, honey, and spices, shaped into small cakes and baked until golden. Imagine biting into one of these honeyed cakes, the rich, nutty flavor melting into a burst of sticky sweetness, a taste that has endured through millennia. But honey wasn't just for sweets. It was also a crucial ingredient in savory dishes. Picture a tender roast goose, its skin crisp and glistening with a glaze of honey, coriander, and cinnamon. Or imagine a thick, hearty stew made from lentils, onions, and honey spiked with a dash of cumin, and served with slices of warm, freshly baked bread. The Egyptians loved their spices, and honey was the perfect counterbalance, its sweetness offsetting the earthy, pungent flavors of garlic, cumin, and mustard seed. In fact, honey was often used as a preservative, a way to extend the shelf life of foods in the scorching desert heat. Picture rows of clay jars sealed with wax, each one filled with dates submerged in honey, a sticky, sweet syrup that kept the fruit fresh for months. This wasn't just practical. It was a way to ensure that even in the leanest of seasons, there was always a taste of sweetness to be had. Now, imagine the kitchen of a more humble Egyptian home. The floors are packed dirt, the walls are simple mud brick, and the cooking area consists of a small clay oven and a handful of rudimentary pots. But even here, honey has a place. A mother stirs a pot of porridge made from emmer wheat, drizzling in a spoonful of honey to make it palatable for her children. Or a farmer's wife bakes small honey-sweetened loaves to bring to the temple, as an offering to the gods, a simple but heartfelt gesture, a gift to the divine from those who have little to give. But honey wasn't just about taste. It was also believed to have magical properties, capable of warding off evil spirits and protecting against illness. Imagine a young bride standing nervously before the threshold of her new home. Her mother-in-law hands her a small cup filled with honey and milk, a concoction believed to bring good luck and fertility. The bride drinks the sweetness coating her tongue, a symbolic gesture meant to ensure that her marriage will be as sweet as the nectar of Ra. Historians still debate the extent to which honey was considered a luxury item versus a common household staple. While it was certainly abundant in the royal courts and temple kitchens, the average farmer likely had far less access to this golden treasure. Some scholars suggest that honey was used sparingly in rural households reserved for special occasions or religious offerings, while others believe that bee colonies were maintained even in modest villages, allowing commoners to produce small quantities of honey for personal use. And honey wasn't just a culinary ingredient. It was also a key component in ancient Egyptian beer. Yes, you heard that right. The Egyptians were avid beer drinkers, and honey beer was a particular favorite, a potent brew made by fermenting honey barley and emmer wheat. Imagine sitting in a dimly lit tavern, the air thick with the scent of stale beer and roasting meat, as a server pours you a cup of sweet golden honey beer, the froth glistening in the firelight. It wasn't just a drink. It was a ritual, a way to commune with the gods and celebrate life's simple pleasures. And then there were the festivals. The Egyptians loved a good party, and no celebration was complete without honey. During the annual festival of Hathor, for instance, revelers would gather to feast, dance, and drink honey-laced beer until the streets echoed with laughter and song. Honey cakes were handed out to the crowd, each one shaped like a cow's udder, a tribute to Hathor, the cow-headed goddess of love and joy. Picture the scene, a wild, boisterous celebration under the starlit sky. The sweet scent of honey mingling with the smoke of incense, the sound of tambourines and drums echoing across the sands. But honey's culinary uses weren't limited to festive occasions. It was also a form of sustenance, a source of energy and nutrition. In a land where food scarcity was a constant concern, imagine a soldier preparing for battle, gulping down a thick paste made from honey, and ground seeds, a high-calorie snack that provided quick fuel for long marches and intense combat. Or a laborer working on the construction of a temple stopping to dip a piece of flatbread in honey for a burst of sweetness and strength. For the Egyptians, honey was more than just a food. It was a symbol of life's fleeting sweetness, a reminder that even in a harsh, unforgiving land, there was always a taste of paradise to be found. And as the sun set over the Nile, casting a golden glow across the fields and temples, it was easy to see why honey held such a special place in their hearts. It was a gift from the gods, a taste of heaven on our earth, a reminder that life, despite all its hardships, could still be sweet. Now, step into the private quarters of an ancient Egyptian queen. The air is perfumed with the rich floral scent of lotus blossoms, and the flickering light of oil lamps dances across the walls. Servants move silently, their hands laden with bowls of fragrant oils, creamy pastes, and gleaming jars of honey. This is the queen's beauty ritual, a sacred, almost mystical practice where honey takes center stage. For the ancient Egyptians, beauty wasn't just skin deep. It was a reflection of one's divine essence, a way to honor the gods through self-care. And when it came to maintaining that godlike glow, honey was a superstar ingredient. Picture the queen reclining on a chaise, her skin glistening as a servant smooths a thick honey mask over her face. The golden syrup is warm, sticky, and sweet, a luxurious treatment that softens her skin and imparts a radiant sheen. But honey wasn't just for royalty. Women across Egypt, from the wealthiest noblewomen to the humblest farmer's wife, used honey in their beauty regimens. It was believed to be a gift from the gods, a substance that could preserve youth, restore vitality, and protect against the harsh desert sun. And in a culture where appearance was tied to divine favor, looking beautiful wasn't just vanity, it was a spiritual duty. Historians still debate the exact recipes used in these ancient beauty treatments, but surviving texts provide tantalizing clues. The Ebers Papyrus, for instance, describes a honey-based face mask made from honey milk and natron, a natural salt collected from dry lake beds. The mixture was said to cleanse the skin, reduce blemishes, and leave a smooth, youthful glow. Imagine slathering this sticky concoction over your face, the honey's warmth seeping into your skin, the scent of milk mingling with the salty tang of natron. But that's not all. Honey was also used as a natural exfoliant. Picture a noblewoman standing in a private bath, a servant massaging her arms and legs with a scrub made from honey and crushed lotus petals. The honey binds the petals together, creating a fragrant paste that sloughs away dead skin, leaving behind a soft, luminous glow. And for those who could afford it, honey was mixed with fine sand or ground alabaster to create a more intensive exfoliating treatment. Now, let's talk about hair. The Egyptians were serious about their hair care, and honey played a starring role in their shampoos and conditioners. Imagine a woman sitting by a pool, her long, dark hair cascading down her back, as a servant pours a warm mixture of honey and castor oil over her scalp. The honey acts as a natural conditioner, sealing in moisture and adding shine, while the oil nourishes the hair follicles, promoting growth and preventing breakage. And it wasn't just women who indulged in these honey treatments. Men, too, used honey to maintain their appearance. Picture a young scribe standing before a polished copper mirror, carefully rubbing a honey-based balm into his beard. The balm is thick and fragrant, made from honey, olive oil, and ground frankincense, a concoction designed to soften the hair condition, the skin, and leave behind a faint, musky scent. Historians still argue whether these honey treatments were reserved for the elite or if they were accessible to commoners as well. Some scholars suggest that while the finest honey's dark, richly flavored varieties collected from wild hives were reserved for the wealthy, lower quality honey was widely available and used in more basic beauty routines. Imagine a peasant woman dipping her fingers into a simple mixture of honey and river mud, massaging the gritty paste into her skin to ward off the harsh desert winds. But the Egyptians didn't stop at skin and hair. They also used honey to create aromatic perfumes and balms. Picture a royal perfumer standing before a clay oven, stirring a pot of melted beeswax mixed with honey and essential oils. The sweet, heady scent of frankincense and myrrh fills the air as the mixture is poured into small, intricately carved jars. These perfumes weren't just for smelling good, they were believed to contain protective, almost magical properties that could ward off evil spirits and attract divine favor. Now, imagine a queen preparing for a feast. She sits before a gilded mirror, a servant carefully applying a honey-based kohl around her eyes. The kohl is dark and glossy, mixed with honey to create a smooth, blendable paste that not only defines her eyes, but also protects them from the glaring desert sun. In a world where beauty was synonymous with divinity, every touch of honey was a reminder of the god's sweetness and protection. But honey's role in beauty rituals wasn't limited to cosmetics. It was also used as a healing salve for minor injuries and skin irritations. Imagine a child running into the house, his knee scraped and bleeding from a fall. His mother takes a jar of honey from the shelf, dips her finger into the golden syrup, and gently spreads it over the wound. The honey stings slightly, but its antimicrobial properties help prevent infection, while its sticky texture creates a natural barrier against dirt and dust. And, in a land where the sun's rays were relentless, honey was also used as a natural sunscreen. Picture a farmer working in the fields, his skin dark and leathery from years of exposure to the sun. Before heading out to work, he slathers a thick paste of honey and clay over his face and arms, the honey moisturizing his skin, while the clay provides a layer of protection. It's a rudimentary form of sunscreen, but in a time long before SPF and zinc oxide, it was the best they had. Historians still debate whether these honey treatments were primarily practical, or if they carried deeper symbolic meanings. Some argue that honey's association with the gods elevated it from a mere cosmetic to a kind of sacred anointing, a way to imbue the body with divine essence and align oneself with the powers of the gods. Others suggest that honey's luxurious texture and golden hue simply made it a natural choice for those seeking to emulate the glow of the sun god Ra. Regardless of its intended purpose, honey remained a vital part of ancient Egyptian beauty culture, a symbol of sweetness, purity, and divine favor. And as the sun sets over the Nile, casting a golden glow over the palace walls, you can almost hear the rustle of silken robes, the clinking of alabaster jars, and the whispered incantations of women, anointing themselves with honey, each drop a prayer for beauty, protection, and a touch of heavenly sweetness. Now, imagine the sun setting over the Nile, the sky blazing with hues of orange and crimson, as the river glistens like molten gold. In the distance, a priestess raises a bowl of honey to the heavens, her voice carrying a hymn to Ra, the sun god, as the air fills with the scent of burning incense. Honey wasn't just a food or a medicine in ancient Egypt. It was a powerful symbol woven into the very fabric of their mythology and storytelling. For the Egyptians, honey wasn't just a substance. It was a link to the divine, a tangible manifestation of celestial power. In fact, they believed that honey was born from the tears of Ra himself. According to legend, when Ra wept, his tears fell to the earth and transformed into bees. These bees then produced honey, making every drop a piece of divine essence, a nectar imbued with the sun, God's strength and sweetness. Imagine walking through a temple, adorned with hieroglyphs, each one telling a story of gods and goddesses of life and death, of the eternal struggle between chaos and order. Honey appears in many of these stories not just as a food, but as a powerful, almost magical substance that could bridge the gap between mortal and immortal life and death. Take, for instance, the tale of Isis and Osiris, a story of love, betrayal, and resurrection. When Osiris was killed and dismembered by his brother Set, it was Isis who reassembled his body using honey as one of the sacred substances to seal his wounds and restore his form. Picture Isis kneeling over Osiris, her hands trembling as she pours honey over his body, the golden liquid glistening in the dim light as she chants incantations to the gods. In this context, honey wasn't just a healer. It was a conduit for divine power, a substance capable of resurrecting the dead and restoring life. But honey wasn't only associated with the gods of life. It was also connected to the underworld. The Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and prayers meant to guide the deceased through the afterlife, makes several references to honey. In one passage, the deceased is offered bread and beer and honey as nourishment for their journey through the underworld. The honey is not just sustenance. It's a symbol of eternal sweetness, a promise that even in the land of the dead, there is still a taste of life's pleasures. Historians still debate the extent to which honey was viewed as a magical substance versus a practical one. Some argue that its use in rituals and spells was purely symbolic, a way to connect with the gods and invoke their favor. Others suggest that the Egyptians truly believed honey had mystical properties capable of warding off evil spirits and protecting the soul from harm. Now, let's step away from the temples and tombs and into the world of everyday Egyptians. Imagine a farmer, his hands rough and calloused from years of labor, placing a small jar of honey on a makeshift altar in his home. He whispers a prayer to Hathor, the goddess of fertility and motherhood, asking her to bless his crops and protect his family. The honey is a simple offering, but its meaning is profound. It's a gift to the gods, a token of gratitude, and a request for divine protection. But honey's symbolism wasn't always so sweet. In some stories, it was a tool of vengeance and punishment. Take the tale of Queen Cleopatra, who was said to have used honey in a rather gruesome way. According to one account, Cleopatra ordered her enemies to be encased in honey and left to the mercy of insects, a sticky, suffocating fate that underscored honey's darker, more sinister side. Historians still argue over the veracity of this tale, with some suggesting it was a later Greek or Roman embellishment intended to paint Cleopatra as a ruthless, vengeful queen. Others believe it may have been a cautionary tale, a warning of the consequences of defying the gods, or a reminder that even the sweetest substance can become a weapon in the wrong hands. But honey's darker uses didn't end there. In some spells, honey was used to bind and control spirits. Picture a priest standing in a darkened chamber, a bowl of honey in one hand and a papyrus scroll in the other. He recites a spell calling upon the spirits to obey his command, then dips his finger into the honey and traces a circle on the floor. The honey becomes a magical barrier, a line that no evil spirit can cross, a sweet prison for the restless dead. And then there were the love spells. Yes, in a world where gods and spirits walked among the living, honey was also considered a powerful aphrodisiac, a substance capable of igniting passion and binding hearts together. Imagine a woman desperate to win the love of a man who has spurned her. She visits a sorceress who hands her a vial of honey mixed with powdered lotus petals and whispers an incantation. Drip 3 drops of this onto his tongue, the sorceress says, and his heart will be as sweet as the nectar of Ra. Historians still debate whether these love spells were taken seriously, or if they were more akin to folk remedies, a mix of wishful thinking and psychological suggestion. But the fact remains that honey, with its intoxicating sweetness and golden glow, was considered a substance capable of influencing the heart and mind, a potion as powerful as any poison. But let's return to the temples, to the priests standing before altars laden with offerings of honey and bread. Imagine the air thick with the scent of burning myrrh, the low hum of chanting echoing off the stone walls. Honey is poured over statues of the gods, its golden rivulets glistening like liquid sunlight. It's an offering of sweetness, a symbol of life's pleasures, a prayer for protection and favor. And as the ceremony draws to a close, the priests dip their fingers into the honey, anointing their foreheads with small sticky dots, a gesture that symbolizes the sweetness of life, the power of the gods, and the hope for a future as bright and golden as the honey itself. For the Egyptians, honey wasn't just a food or a medicine. It was a substance steeped in myth and meaning, a bridge between the mortal and the divine, the living and the dead. And as the sun finally dips below the horizon, casting its last golden rays over the Nile, you can almost taste the sweetness in the air, a reminder that in the land of the gods, even the simplest of things can carry the weight of eternity. Imagine the ancient docks of Thebes, where the air is thick with the scent of spices grain and the unmistakable sweetness of honey. The riverbank is a hive of activity boats loaded with amphora, sway gently as laborers haul sacks of wheat and jars of honey onto waiting barges. Merchants shout over the din, haggling over prices, their hands sticky with the golden syrup. In ancient Egypt, honey wasn't just a household staple. It was a commodity as precious as gold, a trade item that connected the land of the pharaohs to distant kingdoms. To understand honey's role in trade, you have to imagine a world where currency didn't consist of coins or bills. Instead, people traded in goods, and honey was one of the most valuable. It wasn't just because it was delicious or medicinal. It was because honey lasted. In a world where food could spoil, in the sweltering desert heat, honey was virtually immortal. Sealed properly, it could last for decades, even centuries. And that made it a prime candidate for long-distance trade. Historians still argue about how far honey traveled from Egypt. Some suggest it was shipped as far north as Greece and as far east as Mesopotamia, where it was exchanged for rare spices, precious metals, and exotic woods. Others believe that Egyptian honey was primarily traded within the kingdom itself, used to pay taxes, settle debts, or make offerings to the gods. Imagine the scene. A caravan of traders makes its way across the desert camels, swaying under the weight of heavy clay jars filled with honey. The traders travel by night to avoid the blistering heat, each step a crunch of sand beneath their feet. And as they move, they carry not just honey, but the essence of Ra's tears, the sweetness of the gods sealed in clay and wax, ready to be traded for treasures from distant lands. But honey wasn't just traded as a sweetener or a preservative. It was also considered a powerful medicine, and that made it even more valuable. Picture a healer in a distant Babylonian city unsealing a jar of Egyptian honey and mixing it with herbs to make a soothing salve for burns and wounds. This wasn't just a recipe. It was a connection to a far-off land, a taste of Egypt's divine nectar, now part of a healing ritual thousands of miles away. And then there were the elite customers, the kings, queens, and high priests who demanded the finest honey for their tables and their altars. Imagine a palace kitchen in the Minoan kingdom of Crete, where chefs are preparing a lavish feast for a visiting Egyptian envoy. The centerpiece of the meal, a roast lamb, its skin crisp and glistening with a glaze made from imported Egyptian honey and wine. The honey is dark and fragrant, with a complex, almost floral taste, a far cry from the thin, pale honey produced by local bees. Historians still debate whether Egypt's honey was considered superior to that of other regions. Some argue that Egyptian honey was prized for its rich, bold flavor, a result of the unique flora that lined the banks of the Nile. Others suggest that the Egyptians simply had more honey to trade thanks to their advanced beekeeping techniques and extensive networks of apiaries. And it wasn't just the honey itself that was valuable. The beeswax was equally sought after. Picture a craftsman in a distant Phoenician port, dipping his hands into a vat of melted beeswax, shaping it into delicate figurines and amulets. The wax is smooth and malleable, infused with the faint lingering scent of honey. It's not just a material. It's a piece of Egypt, a fragment of the sun, God's divine essence, now molded into a protective charm to be sold in the marketplace. But honey wasn't only traded as a product, it was also used as a form of currency. In a world without standardized coins, honey was as good as gold, a liquid asset that could be measured, weighed, and exchanged. Picture a scribe standing in a busy marketplace, scratching out a transaction on a clay tablet. A farmer has just sold a cartload of barley, and in exchange he receives 2 jars of honey. The scribe records the deal, sealing the contract with a dab of wax and a quick press of a signet ring. Historians still argue whether honey was considered a form of official currency, or if it was simply a high-value trade item. Some suggest that honey was primarily used to pay taxes or make religious offerings. while others believe it functioned as a kind of barter currency, accepted as payment for goods and services throughout the kingdom. Now, imagine a royal caravan traveling to Nubia, where the pharaoh's envoys are negotiating a trade agreement for gold and exotic animal pelts. Among the gifts they bring to the Nubian king are jars of the finest honey, each one sealed with a clay stopper stamped with the royal insignia. The honey is thick and dark, with a taste as rich as the Nile's silt, a gift fit for a king, a diplomatic gesture wrapped in sweetness. But trade wasn't always a peaceful endeavor. In some cases, honey was used to pay tribute to foreign rulers, a kind of ransom extracted in exchange for peace. Picture a delegation of Egyptian envoys bowing before a Hittite king, their arms laden with gifts, fine linens, carved ivory, and jars of honey. The king accepts the honey, dipping his finger into the jar and tasting the thick, sticky sweetness. It's a token of submission, a gesture that says, "We come in peace," even as both sides eye each other with suspicion. And honey wasn't just valuable in the physical world, it was also considered a form of spiritual currency. Picture a high priest standing before a statue of Hathor, offering a bowl of honey to the goddess. "Accept this gift," he whispers, "and bless our harvests with your divine sweetness." In this context, honey wasn't just a commodity. It was a bridge between the mortal and the divine, a way to barter with the gods themselves. For the Egyptians, honey was more than a food or a medicine. It was a symbol of abundance, a measure of wealth, a token of divine favor. And as the sun sets over the Nile, casting long golden shadows over the bustling marketplace, you can almost hear the merchants haggling over prices, the clinking of amphorae being loaded onto ships, the distant hum of bees in the fields beyond the city walls. Honey was more than just a trade item. It was a link between worlds, a tangible reminder that in a land of sand and stone, sweetness could still flow, a gift from the gods, traded from hand to hand, jar to jar through the winding labyrinth of ancient Egyptian commerce. Imagine yourself walking through the grand halls of a royal palace in ancient Egypt. The walls are adorned with vibrant frescoes, depicting scenes of feasting, dancing, and offerings to the gods. The air is perfumed with incense, and servants carry trays piled high with delicacies, figs stuffed with honey, roasted meats glazed in golden syrup, and delicate pastries dripping with sweetness. In a world where the common diet consisted mainly of bread, onions, and lentils, honey was a mark of power, a tangible symbol of wealth and status. For the elite of ancient Egypt, honey was more than just a sweet treat, it was a statement. To serve honey at a feast was to showcase one's wealth, to flaunt a luxury that most commoners could only dream of tasting. Picture a pharaoh, reclining on a gilded couch, a cup of honeyed wine in his hand, as musicians play and dancers whirl around him. Each bite of honey-laced pastry is a reminder of his divine status, a taste of the nectar that the gods themselves consumed. Historians still argue over how accessible honey truly was to the general population. Some suggest that honey was reserved for the elite, a delicacy that only the wealthy could afford. Others believe that while the finest, richest honeys were indeed kept for the royal court, lower quality honey was more widely available, traded in markets and used in simple household recipes. But for the pharaohs and their courtiers, honey was more than just food. It was a symbol of divine right, a taste of immortality. The pharaoh, after all, was considered a living god, the earthly embodiment of Ra, whose tears had become bees, whose bees had created honey. To consume honey was in a way to consume the essence of the gods themselves. Now, imagine a royal banquet held in honor of a visiting dignitary. The long banquet table is laden with gold and silver plates, each one piled high with dishes that gleam with honey's golden sheen. There's honey-glazed duck, the skin crisp and sticky, the meat tender and rich. There's bread dipped in honey and sprinkled with sesame seeds, each bite a burst of sweetness and crunch. And for dessert, there are honey cakes shaped like lotus flowers, delicate and fragrant, a nod to the goddess Hathor. But the symbolism of honey extended beyond the dining table. In ancient Egypt, honey was also a part of royal rituals used to anoint the pharaoh during coronation ceremonies. Picture the scene. The pharaoh stands before a statue of Ra, his arms outstretched as a high priest pours honey over his hands. The honey drips down his arms, a golden river symbolizing the divine favor bestowed upon him by the gods. To be anointed with honey was to be marked as chosen a living deity on earth. And it wasn't just the pharaoh who used honey to assert power and status. Wealthy nobles and priests also used honey to distinguish themselves from the common people. Imagine a priestess of Hathor preparing for a festival. She sits in her chamber, her attendants brushing her hair and anointing her skin with honey-based oils. The honey is mixed with fragrant spices, cinnamon, myrrh, and frankincense, a blend reserved for the most powerful and influential. The scent wafts through the room, heavy and sweet, a perfume of status and luxury. Historians still debate whether honey was used as a form of tribute or tax. Some scholars suggest that honey was collected as a form of payment to the pharaoh, a tangible way for farmers and beekeepers to contribute to the royal coffers. Others believe that honey was offered as tribute by foreign nations, a diplomatic gift that carried not only sweetness, but also the weight of submission. Picture a Nubian envoy arriving at the palace gates, his entourage laden with gifts for the pharaoh. Among the treasures, gold, ivory, exotic animal skins, are jars of dark, rich honey, sealed with wax and stamped with the insignia of a foreign king. The honey is presented as a gift, but it is also a gesture of respect, an acknowledgement of the pharaoh's superior power. But honey wasn't just about the pharaohs and the priests. It was also a marker of social status among the wealthy elite. Imagine a merchant's wife hosting a dinner party in her lavish home. The guests sit on cushioned benches, their hands reaching for platters of roasted figs drizzled with honey. As they eat, they compliment the hostess on her generosity, her ability to provide such a luxury in such abundance. Honey, in this context, is more than food, it's social currency, a way to impress and elevate oneself in the eyes of the community. And then there were the weddings. Imagine a young couple standing before a temple altar, their hands joined as a priest pours honey over their clasped fingers. The honey is thick and golden, a symbol of the sweet life they are about to embark upon together. May your days be as sweet as Ra's nectar, the priest intones, and the couple smiles, the honey trickling down their hands like a promise. But what about the commoners? For those who couldn't afford honey in abundance, there was still a way to enjoy its sweetness on special occasions, during festivals, or as a rare treat gifted by a generous employer. Picture a group of workers gathered around a fire after a long day building a temple. The overseer passes around a small jar of honey, a reward for their labor, and each man dips his finger into the jar, savoring the rich, sticky sweetness as it melts on his tongue. For a brief moment, the taste of honey is a taste of power, a taste of wealth, a taste of a life they can only dream of. Historians still argue whether honey was a staple food or a rare luxury for the lower classes. Some suggest that honey was more widely available than previously thought, particularly in regions with abundant bee colonies. Others maintain that honey was so closely tied to power and status that commoners would rarely, if ever, taste it. But regardless of who had access to it, the meaning of honey remained the same, a symbol of sweetness, divinity, and power. To eat honey was to taste the tears of Ra, to consume the essence of the gods, to claim a piece of heaven for oneself. And as the banquet winds down, as the guests rise to their feet, and the musicians play their final song, the air is thick with the scent of honey, a reminder that in ancient Egypt, sweetness was more than a taste. It was a symbol, a status, a divine connection, a golden thread that bound the living and the dead, the rich and the poor, the gods and the mortals. Picture a lush green field along the banks of the Nile. The water is shimmering in the sunlight, and rows of crops sway gently in the breeze. Farmers move through the fields, their feet sinking into the dark, fertile soil, as they tend to the crops that will feed their families and fill the granaries of the kingdom. But there's another group of workers here, smaller, buzzing, and just as vital to the prosperity of Egypt, the bees. While we often think of honey as a luxury for the ancient Egyptians, it was also a key component in their agricultural system. Bees were more than just honey producers, they were pollinators, tiny winged workers that played a crucial role in sustaining Egypt's agriculture. Imagine standing in a field of clover or wildflowers, the air thick with the scent of blossoms, and the soft hum of bees darting from flower to flower. Each tiny bee carries grains of pollen fertilizing plants and ensuring that the crops will bear fruit. Historians still debate the extent to which the Egyptians understood the pollination process. Some argue that they merely observed the connection between bees and crop abundance without fully grasping the mechanics of pollination. Others suggest that they had a rudimentary understanding of the bee's role in the reproductive cycle of plants, even if they couldn't articulate it scientifically. But regardless of their scientific knowledge, the Egyptians recognized at least that bees were vital to agriculture. They maintained beehives near fields of crops, ensuring that their precious pollinators had ample access to nectar and pollen. Imagine a line of clay hives positioned strategically along the edge of a wheat field, each one buzzing with activity, as thousands of bees zip back and forth, collecting nectar and pollinating the crops in the process. Now, let's step into a bustling marketplace in Thebes. Farmers are unloading baskets of fruits, vegetables, and grains, each one a testament to a successful harvest. And in the midst of it all, a beekeeper sets up his stall, his clay jars gleaming in the sun. He opens a jar, revealing thick golden honey, and the scent wafts through the air, drawing customers like bees to a flower. But the honey isn't just a sweet treat, it's a sign of a successful crop, a tangible reminder of the bees' tireless work in the fields. And it wasn't just the farmers who understood the importance of bees. The pharaohs themselves took an interest in protecting and cultivating these tiny workers. In fact, one of the oldest symbols of Egyptian royalty was the bee. The title of King of Upper and Lower Egypt included the phrase, "he," of the sedge and the bee, signifying the ruler's dominion over both agricultural lands and the fertile delta where bees thrived. Imagine the royal seal stamped onto a scroll, a tiny bee, its wings outstretched, a symbol of the king's power to nourish and protect the land. For the pharaoh, the bee was more than just an insect. It was a symbol of order and industry, a divine worker serving the gods by sustaining life through pollination and the production of honey. Historians still argue over the exact origins of the bee as a royal symbol. Some believe it was adopted from the early kings of Lower Egypt, where bees were particularly abundant. Others suggest that the symbol was chosen for its industrious nature, a quality that the pharaohs sought to embody in their rule. But while the bee was a symbol of power and fertility, it was also a source of practical wealth. Honey was considered a valuable agricultural product, and it was often used to pay taxes or settle debts. Picture a farmer standing before a royal scribe, a jar of honey cradled in his arms, as he presents his tribute to the pharaoh. The scribe inspects the honey, checking its consistency and aroma, then records the payment on a clay tablet, a transaction sealed with a drop of wax. And honey wasn't just used to pay taxes. It was also used to feed workers during large construction projects. Imagine the workers building a massive temple, their bodies slick with sweat as they haul stone blocks under the relentless sun. At midday, they take a break to eat their rations, bread dipped in honey, a simple but energizing meal that provides the strength they need to keep working. Historians still debate whether honey was a staple food for common laborers, or if it was reserved for the overseers and craftsmen. Some argue that honey was too valuable to waste on common workers, while others suggest that small amounts of lower quality honey were distributed as rations, particularly during times of intense labor. But regardless of how much honey they received, the workers would have been acutely aware of the bees' role in sustaining the fields and crops that fed them. In fact, some temples even included prayers to the bees, asking for their protection and blessing. Imagine a priest standing before a stone altar, offering a small bowl of honey to the gods, his voice echoing through the temple as he prays for a bountiful harvest. And let's not forget the beeswax, a byproduct of honey production, that was just as valuable as the honey itself. Wax was used in everything from candle making to sealing documents, to creating intricate amulets and figurines. Picture a craftsman sitting in a dimly lit workshop, his hands deftly shaping a small figure out of beeswax. The wax is warm and pliable, and as he molds it, he whispers a prayer, infusing the charm with protective power. But beeswax had another more practical use. It was essential for waterproofing. Imagine a boat made from bundles of papyrus reeds lashed together with rope. Without protection, the boat would quickly become waterlogged and sink. But with a coating of beeswax, the reeds are sealed, repelling water and keeping the vessel afloat. For the fishermen and traders who relied on the Nile for their livelihoods, beeswax was quite literally a lifesaver. Historians still argue over the extent to which beeswax was traded versus produced locally. Some believe that certain regions specialized in wax production, while others suggest that it was a byproduct collected by every beekeeper, used as needed, and traded when there was a surplus. Now, imagine the sunset over the fields, the bees returning to their hives as the farmers pack up their tools. The air is still warm, and the scent of blooming flowers lingers as the last rays of sunlight catch the gleam of clay jars filled with honey. The bees have done their work, fertilizing crops, producing wax, and creating the golden nectar that will sustain the people of Egypt through the lean months ahead. For the ancient Egyptians, honey was more than just a sweet treat. It was a vital part of their agricultural system, a product of nature's tiniest workers, a symbol of divine order and abundance. And as the night falls and the fields grow quiet, you can almost hear the gentle hum of the bees as they settle in for the night, their hives heavy with the nectar of Ra's tears. Imagine a moonlit night in ancient Egypt. The sands are cool, and the Nile flows silently under the silver glow. In a small candlelit chamber, a woman kneels before a simple altar. Before her sits a small bowl filled with honey, a sprig of dried lotus, and a tiny clay amulet shaped like an ankh. She dips her finger into the honey and draws a circle around the amulet, her lips murmuring words in the language of the gods. Honey wasn't just a food or a luxury. It was a powerful, magical substance, a conduit between the physical and spiritual realms, a tool for charms, curses, and protection. To understand honey's magical significance, you have to step into the mindset of the ancient Egyptians. They believed that every object, plant, and creature was infused with divine energy, a force that could be harnessed through ritual and spell work. And honey, as a substance derived from Ra's tears, was particularly potent. It was both sweet and golden attributes associated with the sun god, and it had the power to ward off evil, attract blessings, and bind spirits to the will of the practitioner. Historians still debate the extent of honey's use in Egyptian magic. Some suggest it was reserved for only the most serious of spells, while others believe it was a common ingredient in household rituals, a staple in the toolkit of both temple priests and village healers. One of the most common magical uses for honey was as a protective charm. Picture a mother sitting beside her child who has fallen ill with a fever. She takes a small clay jar, dips her finger into the honey, and draws a symbol over the child's forehead, the Eye of Horus, a protective glyph believed to ward off sickness and evil spirits. As she chants a prayer to Isis, she anoints the child with the honey, believing that its sweetness will attract the god's favor and restore her child to health. But honey's magical properties didn't stop at healing. It was also used to bind and control spirits. Imagine a priest standing in a darkened temple, a clay bowl of honey cradled in his hands. He dips a reed brush into the honey and draws a circle on the ground, chanting a spell as he works. The honey forms a barrier, a sweet prison meant to trap wandering spirits or restless ghosts. Once the circle is complete, the priest whispers an incantation calling upon Ra to seal the spell and keep the spirit contained. Historians still argue whether honey was considered a protective substance because of its physical properties or because of its divine associations. Some scholars suggest that its antimicrobial nature made it a natural choice for warding off decay and disease, leading to its use in protective spells. Others believe that honey's association with Ra elevated it to a sacred status, making it a powerful tool in magical workings. And then there were the curses. Yes, honey wasn't always sweet. In the hands of a skilled practitioner, it could be used as a weapon, a means to bind enemies, attract misfortune, or cause confusion. Picture a woman scorned by a lover standing over a small clay effigy. She dips her fingers into a bowl of honey and coats the effigy, sealing it with the sticky sweetness. As she whispers the curse, she envisions the honey hardening like a cocoon, trapping her enemy in a web of bad luck and misfortune. But honey's most intriguing magical use was as a love charm. In a world where love spells were as common as healing, Sav's honey was the go-to ingredient for those seeking to attract a lover or bind a partner's affections. Imagine a young woman standing before a shrine dedicated to Hathor, the goddess of love and desire. She pours a dollop of honey into a bowl, adds a pinch of powdered rose petals, and whispers her beloved's name. As she stirs the mixture, she speaks an incantation, asking Hathor to sweeten her beloved's heart and draw him to her like a bee to nectar. Historians still debate whether these love charms were truly believed to work, or if they were more of a psychological tool, a way to calm the mind and focus one's intentions. Some suggest that the sweetness of the honey served as a kind of sympathetic magic, a tangible representation of the desired outcome. Others argue that the rituals themselves, with their repetitive chants and tactile actions, created a sense of control and purpose that was just as powerful as any spell. But honey wasn't just used to attract love. It was also used to repel enemies. Imagine a merchant whose business rival has been spreading rumors undercutting his prices and stealing his customers. Desperate to stop the sabotage, the merchant visits a local sorceress. She hands him a small wax figurine, instructs him to dip it in honey and bury it in the sand. As the honey hardens, she says, so too shall your rival's tongue. In this context, the honey acts as both a physical and magical seal, binding the enemy's words and trapping them in silence. And let's not forget the afterlife. Honey was also used in spells designed to guide and protect the deceased on their journey through the underworld. Picture a priest standing before a sarcophagus, his hands slick with honey, as he traces protective symbols over the lid. The honey acts as a barrier, a line of defense against the demons and spirits that prowl the dark corridors of the Duat. As the priest chants the spell, he envisions the honey hardening like a shield, sealing the deceased in a cocoon of divine sweetness. Historians still argue whether honey's use in funerary rites was primarily symbolic, or if it was believed to have tangible, magical properties. Some suggest that the honey was intended to provide nourishment for the deceased, a sweet offering to sustain them in the afterlife. Others believe that the honey acted as a spiritual adhesive, binding protective spells to the body and ensuring that they remained effective throughout eternity. And finally, there was honey's use in divination. Imagine a priestess seated in a darkened chamber, her hands cupped around a bowl of honey. She stares into the golden depths, watching as the surface ripples and swirls. "Show me the truth," she whispers, and waits for a sign. In some cases, honey was poured over sacred objects, its sticky texture believed to attract divine messages or visions. In others, it was dripped onto sand, the patterns interpreted like the entrails of a sacrifice or the flight of birds. For the ancient Egyptians, honey was more than just a sweetener. It was a tool of power, a magical substance that could bind, protect, attract, or repel. And as the night deepens and the moon rises over the sands, you can almost hear the whispers of those ancient spells carried on the wind, like the hum of bees, a reminder that in a world where gods and spirits walked among men, even the simplest of substances could hold untold power. Now, imagine the interior of a tomb deep beneath the sands of ancient Egypt. The air is thick with the scent of myrrh and frankincense, and the flickering light of an oil lamp casts eerie shadows on the walls adorned with vibrant painted scenes of the afterlife. A row of clay jars sits along the back wall, each sealed with wax and marked with hieroglyphics. Inside these jars is a gift for the deceased, a gift as sweet as life itself, honey. For the Egyptians, death wasn't an end, but a continuation. A journey through the underworld to the fields of Aru, a paradise where the righteous would feast, sing, and live eternally in the presence of the gods. And to prepare for that journey, the dead were provided with sustenance, food and drink, to nourish them in the afterlife. Among the most common offerings, jars of honey. Imagine standing before the sarcophagus of a wealthy noble. The walls are covered in painted scenes of the deceased being led by Anubis, the jackal-headed god, through the underworld. At his feet sit jars of honey, carefully sealed to prevent spoilage. Each jar is inscribed with spells and prayers asking the gods to protect the honey to keep it sweet and unspoiled, so that the deceased may savor its sweetness for all eternity. Historians still debate the purpose of these honey jars. Some argue that they were intended as literal food meant to sustain the spirit in the afterlife. Others believe that the honey symbolized eternal sweetness, a promise that the afterlife would be as rich and pleasurable as the finest honey on earth. But honey's role in the afterlife wasn't just about food. It was also a potent symbol of transformation and preservation. The Egyptians believed that honey had the power to ward off decay, to keep the body intact and whole as it journeyed through the underworld. Picture a priest standing over a mummified body, a small brush in his hand. He dips the brush into a pot of honey and carefully paints it over the wrappings, sealing the linens with a layer of sweetness. The honey hardens, forming a protective shell, a barrier against the chaos of decomposition. And it wasn't just the bodies of the deceased that were treated with honey. Sometimes the internal organs removed during the mummification process were coated in honey and placed in canopic jars. Imagine a jar shaped like a falcon's head, its clay surface cool and smooth. Inside the lungs of the deceased rest surrounded by honey, a sweet, sticky barrier that prevents rot and preserves the organs for eternity. Historians still argue over the extent of honey's use in embalming. Some believe it was a rare practice reserved only for the elite, while others suggest that even commoners used small amounts of honey to anoint the bodies of their loved ones. Regardless of its prevalence, honey's association with preservation remained strong. It was a symbol of Ra's eternal light, a taste of immortality, in a world where life was as fragile as a bee's wing. But honey wasn't just a preservative, it was also a sacred offering. Picture a grieving widow standing in the dim light of a tomb, her hands trembling as she places a jar of honey at her husband's feet. "Take this," she whispers, "and may its sweetness follow you to the fields of Aru." The honey is a final act of love, a gift from the living to the dead, a prayer that the deceased will be nourished and comforted in the afterlife. And it wasn't just the grieving who made such offerings. Priests, too, used honey in their rituals, pouring it over statues of the gods to ensure that the deceased would be well received in the afterlife. Imagine a priest standing before a statue of Osiris, the god of the underworld, a bowl of honey cradled in his hands. As he pours the honey over the statue's feet, he chants a prayer, asking Osiris to open the gates of the underworld and grant the deceased a place among the blessed. Historians still debate whether honey was considered a literal currency in the afterlife or if it was purely symbolic. Some suggest that the deceased could barter with the gods using honey, trading it for safe passage through the underworld. Others believe that the honey was simply a gesture of devotion, a way to demonstrate that the deceased had lived a sweet, righteous life deserving of a sweet afterlife. Now, let's step into the world of the elite. Imagine the tomb of a powerful queen, her sarcophagus surrounded by jars of honey, each one sealed with a royal insignia. The honey is dark and rich, gathered from the finest hives in the kingdom. It is a gift not just for the queen herself, but for the gods who guard the gates of the afterlife. "May the gods taste of this honey," reads an inscription on one of the jars, "and grant the queen eternal sweetness." But what about the commoners? Even those who couldn't afford grand tombs or elaborate rituals still included honey in their burial rites. Picture a simple grave dug in the sandy soil, a body wrapped in linen and surrounded by a few modest offerings, a loaf of bread, a small jug of beer and a jar of honey. For the poor, honey was a luxury, a final, precious gift to accompany them into the unknown. And then there were the spells. The Book of the Dead, a collection of prayers and spells intended to guide the deceased through the underworld, includes several references to honey. In one passage, the deceased is instructed to present honey to the gods as an offering of bribe to secure safe passage. "May this honey be sweet upon your lips," the deceased recites, "and may you grant me safe passage through the land of the dead." Historians still argue whether these spells were intended to be taken literally, or if they were symbolic, a way to soothe the gods and ensure a pleasant afterlife. Some suggest that honey was considered a form of spiritual currency, a way to pay for protection and favor. Others believe that the honey was simply a metaphor, a reminder that life and death should be as sweet as the nectar of Ra. But regardless of its exact purpose, honey remained a powerful symbol in the realm of the dead, a symbol of sweetness, preservation, and divine favor. And as the tomb is sealed, as the sands drift over the entrance and the world outside moves on, the jars of honey sit in the darkness untouched, waiting for the soul to return and taste their sweetness once more. For the ancient Egyptians, honey was more than a food or a medicine. It was a promise, a prayer, a gift to the gods and to the dead. And as the years pass, as the honey crystallizes and hardens, it remains a reminder that even in death, life can be sweet. Imagine a warm, sultry night in ancient Egypt. The moon hangs low over the Nile, its silver light casting a shimmering path across the water. In a small, incense-filled chamber, a woman sits cross-legged before a simple altar, a small bowl of honey cradled in her lap. Her fingers tremble as she dips a reed brush into the thick golden liquid. Tonight, she is going to perform a love spell, a ritual as old as time, a prayer to the goddess Hathor to awaken passion in the heart of the man she desires. For the Egyptians, honey wasn't just a sweetener or a preservative. It was also a potent aphrodisiac, a substance believed to have the power to inflame desire, bind hearts, and attract love. In a world where relationships could determine one's social standing future, and even survival love spells were serious business, and honey, with its golden glow and intoxicating sweetness, was the perfect ingredient for a magical charm. Imagine a young woman sitting before a shrine dedicated to Hathor, the goddess of love, music, and fertility. Before her, a bowl of honey mixed with powdered lotus petals and a few drops of fragrant oil. The woman dips her finger into the honey and traces a circle on her chest just over her heart, murmuring the name of her beloved. "May his heart be as sweet as this honey," she whispers, "and may he love me as Ra loves the morning sun." Historians still argue whether these love spells were performed primarily by women or if men too engaged in such rituals. Some suggest that women, often lacking power in public life, turned to love magic as a means of gaining control over their relationships and futures. Others believe that men too used honey spells to attract the attention of a desired lover, or to rekindle the passion of a wife whose affections had waned. But honey wasn't just used in private rituals. It was also a key ingredient in public celebrations of love and fertility. Imagine a festival in honor of Hathor, the goddess whose beauty and sensuality were said to rival the sun itself. The streets are filled with music and dancing, and the air is heavy with the scent of honey cakes baking over open fires. Couples exchange honeyed kisses, sharing bites of sweet pastries as a symbol of their affection. In some cases, these honey rituals took on a darker tone. Imagine a woman whose lover has betrayed her running to a sorceress for help. The sorceress hands her a small clay doll and instructs her to dip it in honey and bury it in the sand. As the honey hardens, the sorceress intones, "So too shall his heart grow cold." The honey in this context is not a symbol of sweetness, but a weapon of binding, a way to freeze a lover's affections or trap him in a web of guilt and longing. Historians still debate whether such curses were believed to have real tangible effects, or if they were simply a way for the heartbroken to vent their frustration. Some argue that the act of dipping a doll in honey and burying it was a form of sympathetic magic, a way to exert control over a lover who had strayed. Others suggest that these spells were more therapeutic than magical, a way for the scorned to feel empowered in a society where women had little recourse against infidelity. But honey wasn't only used to attract love or bind lovers. It was also a key component in fertility spells rituals designed to increase a woman's chances of conceiving. Picture a woman desperate for a child kneeling before a statue of Hathor, her hands sticky with honey as she traces a symbol over her abdomen. "May my womb be as sweet and fruitful as this honey," she whispers, her voice quivering with hope. In some cases, these fertility spells involved elaborate preparations. Imagine a priestess preparing a honey infusion by steeping dried lotus petals and pomegranate seeds in a pot of warm honey. Once the mixture cools, it is poured into a small clay vessel and placed beneath the woman's bed. "Drink this before the new moon," the priestess instructs, "and you will bear a son as strong as Horus." Historians still argue whether these fertility spells were primarily symbolic, or if they were believed to have real biological effects. Some suggest that the act of consuming honey, rich in nutrients and natural sugars, could have served as a kind of placebo, providing a psychological boost to those hoping to conceive. Others believe that the rituals themselves, with their rhythmic chants and repetitive gestures, created a sense of calm and focus, reducing stress and increasing the likelihood of conception. And then there were the wedding rituals. Imagine a bride and groom standing before a crowd of friends and family, their hands bound together with a silk cord dipped in honey. The priestess raises a bowl of honey to the heavens, calling upon Hathor to bless the union with sweetness and fertility. The couple then dips their fingers into the honey and touches each other's lips, sealing their vows with a kiss that tastes of nectar and the promise of love everlasting. But honey's role in love and seduction wasn't limited to spells and rituals. It was also a powerful perfume, a scent designed to attract the eye and entice the senses. Imagine a noblewoman preparing for a banquet, her servants anointing her skin with a mixture of honey, myrrh, and cinnamon oil. The honey clings to her skin, creating a subtle sweet aroma that lingers as she moves through the crowded hall. Men turn to watch her, drawn by the scent as much as by her beauty, their eyes tracing the line of her shoulders, the curve of her neck. Historians still debate whether honey was used as a perfume by itself, or if it was primarily a binding agent for more complex, fragrant oils. Some suggest that honey, with its thick, sticky texture, was ideal for holding and amplifying other scents, making it a natural choice for perfumes and love potions. Others believe that the scent of honey itself, sweet, rich, and intoxicating, was enough to attract attention and evoke desire. But perhaps the most intriguing use of honey in love magic was as a honey trap, a way to entice a lover back into one's arms. Picture a woman standing outside her lover's house, a small jar of honey in her hands. She dips her fingers into the jar and traces a line of honey along the doorframe, whispering, "May he be as drawn to me as the bees are to the flowers." The honey glistens in the moonlight, a sticky, sweet spell meant to lure the lover home. For the Egyptians, honey was more than just a substance. It was a symbol of attraction, a magnet for desire, a tangible link to the gods of love and beauty. And as the moon dips lower in the sky and the stars burn bright against the velvet darkness, you can almost hear the soft murmur of lovers exchanging honeyed kisses, the whispered prayers to Hathor, and the hum of bees echoing through the night, a sweet, seductive lullaby that lingers in the air like the scent of honey itself. Imagine a sunlit morning in modern Egypt. The streets of Cairo are bustling with the chatter of merchants, the honking of cars, and the scent of freshly baked bread. Amidst the vibrant stalls, a vendor lifts a jar of dark amber honey, its surface glistening in the sunlight. Pure honey, he shouts, his voice carrying over the crowd, sweet as the tears of Ra. Thousands of years have passed since the days of the pharaohs, yet honey remains a cherished commodity in Egypt. A golden thread that connects the present to a past, steeped in divine nectar and sacred sweetness. For the Egyptians, honey's significance has endured through millennia. While modern Egyptians no longer believe that bees are born from Ra's tears, the reverence for honey remains. In markets and shops, jars of honey line the shelves, each one labeled with its region of origin: Nubian honey, Delta honey, wildflower honey. Each has its own distinct flavor, texture, and cultural significance, a testament to the diverse landscapes of modern Egypt. But honey's role in modern Egypt isn't just about taste, it's about tradition. Imagine a grandmother sitting at her kitchen table, a bowl of steaming, honey-drizzled fatir before her. She tears off a piece of the flaky, buttery pastry and hands it to her grandchild, saying, "Eat this, and may your life be as sweet as honey." In moments like these, honey becomes more than a food. It's a symbol of love, of blessing, of continuity. Historians still debate how much of ancient Egypt's honey traditions have survived in contemporary practices. Some argue that the ancient rituals and spells have been largely forgotten, while others suggest that echoes of those traditions can still be found in modern folk practices and superstitions. Take, for example, the use of honey in weddings. In ancient Egypt, couples sealed their vows with honey, a sweet promise of a life filled with love and prosperity. Today, newlyweds in Egypt are often given honey-based sweets as a blessing for a sweet and prosperous marriage. Imagine a bride and groom sitting side by side, their hands intertwined as relatives present them with platters of honey-soaked basbousa, a rich, dense cake made from semolina and sweetened with syrup. As they eat, the crowd chants, "May your love be as sweet as this honey," a refrain that echoes down through the centuries. But honey's significance extends beyond love and marriage. It is also a symbol of health and healing, a belief that dates back to the days when Egyptian healers applied honey to wounds and mixed it into medicinal potions. Today, modern Egyptians still use honey to soothe sore throats, heal cuts, and strengthen the immune system. Picture a mother in a small village, stirring a spoonful of honey into a cup of warm milk, her child sniffling and coughing by her side. "Drink this," she says, "and the gods will make you well." Historians still debate whether modern Egyptians are consciously preserving these ancient practices, or if the continuity is more unconscious, a natural result of cultural memory and oral tradition. Some suggest that the medicinal use of honey in modern Egypt is a direct link to ancient recipes passed down through generations. Others believe that honey's healing properties are simply universal, a common remedy that transcends time and place. And then there is the religious significance of honey. In ancient Egypt, Honey was a sacred offering to the gods, a sweet gift meant to secure divine favor. Today, honey remains a symbol of blessing and abundance in Islamic culture. During Ramadan, Muslims break their fast with dates and honey, a tradition rooted in the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, who described honey as a cure for all ailments. Imagine a family gathered around a table at sunset, the air thick with the scent of spiced tea and warm bread. The father dips a date in honey, hands it to his youngest child, and recites a prayer of gratitude. The child bites into the sweet, sticky fruit, its richness, a reminder that even in times of hardship, sweetness can still be found. But honey isn't just a food or a medicine. It's also an economic lifeline for many modern Egyptians. Picture a beekeeper standing in the shade of an acacia tree, his hands expertly handling a wooden frame covered in bees. In the rural regions of Egypt, beekeeping is a thriving industry, a trade passed down through generations. Beekeepers harvest honey, not just for local consumption, but also for export, sending jars of Egypt's golden nectar to countries around the world. Historians still argue over how much of Egypt's ancient beekeeping techniques have survived into the modern era. Some suggest that contemporary beekeepers still use methods remarkably similar to those practiced by their ancestors, including the use of cylindrical clay hives and smoke to calm the bees. Others believe that modern beekeeping has been heavily influenced by Western practices, with wooden box hives and mechanical extractors replacing traditional methods. But even amidst modern advancements, the spiritual and cultural significance of honey persists. Imagine a man standing in the courtyard of a mosque, a jar of honey in his hands. It's the first Friday of the month, and he's come to offer the honey as sadaqah, a charitable gift meant to bless the poor and bring favor to the giver. He places the jar on a woven mat alongside other offerings, dates, breadfruit, and steps back, his head bowed in prayer. In this moment, honey is more than just a commodity. It's a bridge between the earthly and the divine, a gesture of gratitude and humility. And what about the afterlife? While modern Egyptians no longer bury their dead with jars of honey, the association between sweetness and eternity endures. Imagine a mourner standing at the grave of a loved one, a small jar of honey in her hands. She dips her finger into the honey and touches it to her lips, a symbolic act of remembrance. May you find sweetness in the next life, she whispers a prayer as old as Egypt itself. For thousands of years, honey has been a symbol of life, love, health, and divine favor in Egyptian culture. From the days of the pharaohs to the bustling streets of modern Cairo, its golden sweetness has remained a constant, a tangible reminder that even in a land of scorching sun and shifting sands, life can still hold sweetness. And as the sun sets over the Nile, casting its last golden rays across the water, you can almost hear the hum of bees in the distance, the murmur of prayers in the mosques, the laughter of children with honey-sticky fingers. The world has changed, but the taste of honey, the taste of Ra's tears, the nectar of the gods remains eternal. Now, as we close our eyes and let the stories of ancient Egypt drift away like the sands of the desert, let's take a moment to savor the sweetness of honey, its warmth, its golden glow, its promise of comfort and healing. Imagine yourself in the cool shadows of a temple, the air rich with the scent of honey and incense, the gentle hum of bees echoing through the stillness. Feel the weight of a clay jar in your hands, its surface smooth and cool, its contents rich and thick as the Nile itself. Breathe in deeply, letting the sweetness fill your senses, melting away the worries of the day. You are safe. You are calm. You are held in the warmth of ancient stories, where the sweetness of a honey connects us all across time, across space, from the hands of the pharaohs to your own. Let the golden light of Ra's tears wash over you, a warm, honeyed glow that carries you gently into the world of dreams, where the gods walk beside you, and the Nile flows softly beneath a starlit sky. Sleep well, sweet dreams.